the court has kind of developed this so-called major questions doctrine that said if an agency or an executive branch is exerting a new power under an old congressional statute, that the exercise of the power has to be very clearly within the statute. And so I think when you look at this statute that allows for these actions on foreign trade, it is not at all clear that Trump has that it gives the executive branch the permanent power to do across-the-board tariffs.
Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Bedford, and I'm here with commentary editor Conn Carroll. Conn, the Supreme Court this week handed President Trump a number of procedural wins in some cases where some judicial tools had been applied against him. The Alien Enemies Act case is one we've talked about before. What did the Supreme Court do there?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Miller and the rest of the White House tried to portray this as a win, but it really was not. You know, he went out there and said, oh, great, you know, we get to start deporting people to El Salvador immediately, which of course, there's no flights been made. Mm-hmm. So basically, the Alien Enemies Act, they were claiming that they have the right to go ahead. Well, first of all, they said that Venezuela was invading us and that this gives them the right to just swoop up and take any Venezuelan who's not a citizen here and send them off to El Salvador. So a number of migrants then sued in federal court here in D.C., but they actually sued under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is an act that kind of controls how government creates all regulations. So like the EPA, when they pass a rule on power plants or even like your dishwasher, they have to go through the process of this act. And so the migrants are claiming that they violated the procedures through the APA. And what the Supreme Court said is like, no, the classic way that you contest government detention is through habeas, and habeas jurisdiction is only allowed where you're being held by the government, which in this case was not DC, it was Texas. So the Supreme Court said, you know, this case has been thrown out and these migrants can file habeas corpus in Texas, which surprised, they did. And yesterday, as a matter of fact, the district court in Texas did issue pretty much the exact same temporary restraining order that the DC judge entered in DC. He entered it for Texas and saying, look, the federal government has no right to deport these people. We're going to litigate these claims. So now the courts are going to litigate the actual substantive merit claims under the Alien Enemies Act.
So at the very least, MAGA allies were saying, look, this is a Supreme Court rebuke of forum shopping, which we've seen from these left-leaning groups who are trying to find friendly courts to advance their challenges to Trump things. We've also seen the Supreme Court push back or claw back on some of the preliminary injunctions that we've seen courts issue. So it seems like the Supreme Court maybe has an appetite to put some limits on the judicial tools. But do we have any sense of how the Supreme Court's going to lean on the actual constitutional questions of the stuff that Trump is doing?
Oh, I mean, you know, it depends on the issue. Like on the Alien Enemy Act, I don't think the Trump administration is going to win, and on birthright citizenship, I also don't think they're going to win. But on some of the other ones, they definitely have a stronger claim. But I think what you see is Trump is really pushing the boundaries everywhere and doesn't mind having setbacks in some federal court cases.
Right. We've seen, you know, some victories with removing agency heads, right, and probationary employees.
And providing probation employees. He won another one on Federal Claims Act. Basically, you have all this USAID funding, and the nonprofits that were cut off from that funding went to court and saying, you know, this should be stopped. And what the court said, what I said at the time, like, this really sounds more like a Federal Court Act claim. So there's a whole court here in D.C. just down the road called the Court of Federal Claims, where you're supposed to enter into contract disputes with the government. That's why it was created. And the Supreme Court said, look, this isn't the district court's job. This is the Court of Federal Claims job. You guys need to go here to get your money.
Speaking of things that Trump is doing that potentially might not pass constitutional muster, you have argued that Trump's tariff policies are illegal. Tell us why.
Sure. So again, we are looking at Trump declaring not an invasion this time, but an emergency in order to invoke something called the International Economic Emergency Act, under which it says Trump has the power to, it actually never even mentions tariffs specifically. The actions cited are asset seizure, blockades, stuff like that, but it never actually says he can institute tariffs on this act. And actually no president has issued tariffs under this act. But Trump is saying that across the board, he can do this. But this is not something that has been litigated. And when you look at the Supreme Court's recent cases on big issues that affect the economy, they have always gone against the agency when the congressional statute is at all vague. So recently, under the Biden administration, you had his clean power plant rule, right? And basically what he was saying was, I'm going to set the amount of carbon that all coal plants can produce at zero, basically phasing out coal plants entirely. And so what the Supreme Court says is like, look, the Clean Air Act says the EPA is supposed to issue the best practices to limit carbon emissions from plants, but it doesn't say you can zero them out. And so the court has kind of developed this so-called major questions doctrine that said if an agency or an executive branch is exerting a new power under an old congressional statute, that the exercise of the power has to be very clearly within the statute. And so I think when you look at this statute that allows for these actions on foreign trade, it is not at all clear that Trump has that it gives the executive branch the permanent power to do across the board tariffs.
So I guess we'll add the lawsuit over this one to our long list of cases that we're watching.
Yes.
Conn, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
You can get more writing from Conn and the rest of the commentary team at washingtonexaminer.com.